Hello, all, and welcome. We are back with another episode in our series, Coaching for Transformation, the podcast series where we explore powerful coaching conversations that drive leadership growth and organizational impact. I'm Dario Minaya, and I'm joined once again by Susan Minaya, Executive Coach, COO, and Chief Learning Strategist at Minaya Learning Global Solutions. Today's episode is something that touches every part of an organization, but it's also something many leaders struggle to navigate, coaching for culture change. Stay tuned to learn more. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, hey, Dario. Always good to be with you. This
Always
is a
exciting.
fun topic.
Yes, I completely agree. This episode covers a really big topic. So why is culture change something that leaders might want to consider having a coach as a thought partner?
Well, I appreciate that question. And I guess I'll start by telling you that, first of all, think about culture. It's very nebulous. I like that word because it kind of shift change. It's kind of hard to describe, right? Or capture the essence of it, but you definitely know it when you experience it within an organization. So culture also has a split personality. Did you ever take psychology classes?
No, I have not actually.
Oh, okay. Well, in psychology, they have this picture of this beautiful woman. And depending on which way you look at it, it can be a beautiful woman or it can be an old man.
Although I have not taken a psychology class, I have seen that photo, yes.
Yeah, so culture is kind of like that. There is the overt culture, which is often defined by values, mission, and vision, sort of at the top and the surface that everybody sees. But then there's that covert or subculture that we often know as this is the way things are really done around here, or maybe even department or team cultures, right? You have these subcultures of these different groups, and that can really make culture change in an organization very challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine how culture change can be so challenging.
Oh, it's really hard work, and it's really often very misunderstood. And it's not about really making things more fun or fixing something bad. It's about being intentional, aligning behaviors and systems. When I talk about systems, I'm not talking about IT systems. I'm talking about systems thinking, organizational thinking, which you know I love that
Yes, I do.
topic. And also leadership expectations with the outcomes that an organization really wants to achieve. So these things have to line up for culture change to be effective. And here's the thing, culture is never a one-size-fits-all, never.
Yeah.
So what works in one company might not work in another. So the real question is your culture helping or is it hindering your strategy? And when it's not aligned, it's probably time to revisit the culture of the organization.
Wow. Okay, so that was a really good overview, but I'd like to back up just a little bit
Sure.
and start with something a bit more simple as, what is culture from a coaching and leadership standpoint?
Well, technically defined, culture is the shared beliefs, norms, and behaviors that can be spoken, that could be unspoken, like we talked about, that guides how people act and interact at work. It's how decisions get made, it's what's rewarded or ignored, and it's what's tolerated or not tolerated in an organization. And sometimes I ask leaders to describe what happens when someone breaks a rule versus when someone lives the values. That contrast can really reveal a lot about them. So let me say this, culture is shaped every day and every single interaction. And it shows up in our hiring practices, our promotions that we have within the organization, our performance reviews, team meetings, like how those things are run throughout the organization, how departments may or may not collaborate with one another across the organization. It's really back to how decisions get made. Is it top down? Is it more collective group discussion and group think? Just different styles. And as coaches, we help leaders really examine the systems that they've created. Often they create these unconsciously. So that's where coaches come in and are really able to help ask those questions that will begin to help them gain greater insight into where they are today and maybe where they want to get to in the future.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, there's no culture that's the same across different organizations, right? And I imagine no two organizations define good culture the same way. Yeah.
Oh, exactly, Dario. And there's no universal good or bad culture. And I want to be really clear about that because otherwise we're being judgmental.
Yeah.
There's only an aligned culture or a misaligned culture with what the goals and mission and strategies are for the organization. So if the goal is really to define a culture for your organization that supports those things, supports your mission, it drives your strategy, and it delivers your desired outcomes.
I think that's a very important distinction to make understanding that some cultures might align with some people and be a bad, quote unquote, culture for them. It isn't necessarily negative in any way, just not aligned for that person specifically. So, as you mentioned, there's no good or bad, just aligned or not aligned with the person's maybe mission, values, or subcontext, right? So, I think that's a very important distinction to make. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely so. And so it's kind of being judgmental. Judge
Yeah.
not, and ye shall not be judged. But, we may not like a culture that drives people in the ground or works 24/7 and all
but that
about
might
results.
align with somebody else, and for them that's a work environment that they thrive in. That's the culture that they can really prosper in. So
Exactly.
that's wonderful. Okay, so when an organization realizes it needs a culture shift, where do we begin?
Well, it always begins with the CEO. It has to start at the top. It just has to. It has to cascade from the top of the house down to throughout the organization. If the most senior leader isn't modeling the desired culture and their actions and words don't match what they're saying they want, but they're doing something different, the effort's going to stall. People see it. The first thing we're going to do, because it involves several steps, right, when you're going through here. So we don't have time to talk about all of them, but just in general. First off, why do you want a culture change? Because this is really hard work. So you better be sure you want to do it.
It's a whole revamp of the organization.
This is not a training event, right? This is a very, very significant shift for the organization. So what's driving it? And the second thing is really to define specific words that describe the culture that you want to see. So it has to be tangible. So think about adjectives. We're innovative, we're nimble, we're service-oriented, results-oriented, whatever that thing is, you have to be very concrete, because if the CEO can't articulate it, no one else is going to be able to understand it either. We ensure really that there's a shared language and understanding of what the desired culture looks and feels like. So again, that's where being very specific and concrete about the expectations is so critical. And crucially, we coach leaders on what they must stop doing as well. If they want to be credible change agents, we talk about and explore with them ways that they're going to be able to do that, because as the CEO, you're going to have to be very specific about the ask. It's often a mix of mindset, leadership habits, and decision-making style that really can make it successful. And these aren't cosmetic changes, Dario. These are transformative changes, and so they're huge.
Wow, yeah. So that sounds like a real transformation. That's a very heavy lift. We just talked about how the CEO kind of sets the tone for that, right? Leading by example through that. Now, I kind of want to look at the framework. So I've asked you many times before in our previous episodes as far as walking us through something. So Susan, I know you use a structured framework when helping organizations lead culture change. Walk us through it.
Okay, well, we'll keep it simple, right, for this conversation. And I think it still captures the essence of all the things you have to think about. And it goes back to vision, alignment, and execution.
Okay.
3 phases, right?
Yeah.
You know how I like 3s.
Yeah. Let's go in order. Let's start with vision.
Okay, we'll start with vision. Usually it starts with one-on-one coaching with the CEO to really articulate what it is that they're wanting. First off, why do they think the culture change is needed? We may poke around there a bit, right, with other people as well, like to kind of help validate certain perspectives or perceptions with other leaders through various instruments like 360s or other things like that. And then if it's decided that we're going to move forward with this, it's like, well, then what's your vision for the culture? What will you tolerate or not tolerate going forward? What behaviors signal success for you? And then what are those adjectives that you're going to use that people can hang on to take the culture change ride along with you so that we know how we're supposed to be behaving and acting and showing up in the workplace? And the other thing is really investigating, do you have the appetite for the long game that they're going to have to play here? And also for the hard decisions that they may need to make, because everybody that's on the bus today may not be the right people for where we're going. And those can be very challenging things to think about, especially when you're looking at executive leadership levels or things like that. You know, the CEO has a huge role. They're the leaders. They have to start this party, if you will, and they have to be able to be the ambassadors for this change, be able to get everybody on board with them, and be able to ascertain who's there with them and who's not, right? And how do I move forward? I think that's where the coach can really be helpful for the executive in this case to really have, ask those probing questions where they really have to explore, what it is that they're trying to achieve. So this foundational work really creates the clarity that they need to lead credibly. Because if I can't be clear and consistent, they say stuff rolls downhill, right? The bad stuff's going to roll out and it's going to be a disaster. So if the CEO is not clear, nobody's going to be clear.
Very true. Now, you did mention everybody on board. So that leads us into our next part of this you mentioned, which is alignment.
Yeah. So the next step is after the CEO really thinks about from their leadership perspective, looking at what's important to me as a leader, what am I trying to create in this organization? Where do I need people to be or want our organization to be from a cultural perspective? Then we have to start getting people lined up with us. So here's where we kind of move from more this one-to-one to more of team type interactions with the next level of leadership, executive leadership on the team. So we really want to focus on getting that executive alignment at the top first. You'll see retreats that'll happen at this point in time for the CEO to kind of socialize their vision that they have. Here's my culture vision. Here's my expectations for leadership across the organization. Here's when I'm looking to begin this and start doing it. And here's the kind of messaging that I want. This is the tangible words that describe the culture we're trying to create. You can see and imagine why for the CEO at this point in time has to be really solid in leading this offsite. Coaches can be really helpful here in facilitating the discussions with the group so that it's a productive session, because it's really critical that that top layer of executive team really is aligned as well, because it's all going to flow from there, cascading out. So they have to all get clear because they're the people that are generally in charge of the different segments of the organization. So then we look at the system in which the culture is going to exist. This includes a lot of HRE kind of things, maybe, to make sure the organizational system can support the shift, right? So here we're going to look at things like, do we need different job roles or different kind of talent? So imagine the way we are attracting talent and how we pull them into the organization for our existing culture may not be the same kind of people or the same kind of roles that we need to for the new culture that we're trying to create. So this is super important to understand. And while we understand we have to shift existing employees towards the new culture through communication, which we'll talk about, we definitely need to seed the organization. This is an opportunity through our hiring practice. Bring the people in that are already where we want to be, mixing them in with the existing employee base to help advance that change curve. So the next thing would be performance management. We talked about how do we hold people accountable for this. So if we're going to have it, this is what we expect of leaders. This is what we expect in behaviors. This is the adjectives of what we are, that we want to see exhibited in our employees. And how's that showing up? And so what is important to us in this new culture? Is it about being nice? It is about being accountable. For example, Dario, and like a Harvard Business Review study on culture change, identified 8 distinct cultures, and they range everything from caring, collaborative, and supportive to more like enjoyable and fun and stimulating. And then you have on the other end, orderly, methodical, cooperative, So there's a lot of words. The words matter, and the words really set the tone for what it is that you're trying to achieve. The other thing is rewards and incentives. So if we have performance management systems, rewards and incentives are part of that, but they're also what will help motivate people to be demonstrating the type of behaviors and things that you want in this new culture and to adopt that. So you can imagine that a results-oriented culture may focus more on bottom line results for rewards and recognition or incentives, whereas an organization that's innovative may focus on cool innovations that come out and also care about the how it was achieved, that they were collaborative when they did it. So there's differences there, and it's really important to think about that. And then communication protocols. So this is an area where they have to be super clear. And I think anyone in communications would be like clapping their hands right now to be recognized for it, because it's often very missed. How we're communicating, what is our protocol for communication for this culture change? And then how are we going to continue to reinforce it throughout the organization over the coming year or years as we go through? And there has to be a way to do that, and defined way to do it, that we avoid confusion. We are super clear about what we're doing. Leaders are prepared for what they have to share. This really sounds a lot like change management, but it is a lot like change management because we're changing the culture. But we're doing it in a way where the behavior piece, it's not just about a change initiative. It's about really the culture in which we work, which makes it a little different than we're just going to do this job differently or have this new product or whatever that's coming into the organization. So really without this structural alignment in these other areas, culture change is really not going to stick.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Mm-hmm. And finally, we have execution.
Yeah, it's about the rollout, and I don't have to belabor this a lot, but it is super important. So if we've done all the groundwork that we have before, we're in a good place to start executing on that. Educating the leaders, doing that cascading communication process that we have, building those communication plans for the organization, and also in our hiring practices and like how we're going out to the external world about who we are and what we stand for. And I think, also creating spaces for feedback, learning and calibration, and then monitoring metrics and results. Yes, we have to, believe it or not, culture change, you have to identify, how are we going to know that we're successful? How do we know if we're moving the needle? I mean, to be frank with you, coaches aren't the only resources supporting culture change. It's just too big. So coaches typically work in tandem with change and strategy consultants that are either internal to the organization or from external firms, like the big consulting firms. And the coach is the executive leader's personal thought partner, if you could think about that. In spite of all these other people running around them trying to help make this happen, the executive coach is someone that the executive leader, the CEO, or those individuals on his executive team can really go to help them really get clear about the things that they want to do to be better at the execution of this.
Seems more like a refined brushstroke versus a broad stroke. Mm-hmm. Wow, that was a lot to digest.
I know.
So how do leaders know if their culture shift is taking hold? I have a prediction that'll be analytics.
Yeah, well, it's analytics.
Yeah. You measure
you have to measure it. So you do that through employee engagement and pulse surveys. Mm-hmm. I think just observation of behavioral changes across the organization, turnover and engagement data would be another metric you could use. Maybe alignment between stated values and decisions made for key strategic initiatives. Like, how did those things show up? And then also, as we talked about, the pulse surveys too that come through, because those, oftentimes companies, they'll do the big employee engagement survey, and then in the next year they'll do a pulse survey. But other ways are just observation in the organization as well. But you need quantitative and qualitative data there. So I think one thing executive coaches can help leaders identify is how to best track and adapt or course correct through questions. So as coaches, it's not our job to tell the leader anything. It's really our job to support where they want to focus while leveraging coaching questions, specifically that they can respond to for greater insight, alignment, and transformation that aligns with their way of thinking or being as a leader, of where they're trying to get to. It's a different kind of relationship.
Wow, this has been an eye-opening episode. Definitely information-packed. Any final thoughts for leaders listening who are thinking about a culture shift? Hopefully not lightly, but sincerely considering.
It's big, and it's a multi-year journey. It's not a project or an initiative. It's a strategic imperative, right? If you're going to tackle this work, you got to be really serious about it, and you have to be ready to play the long game. It is not a short-term thing. And coaching for culture change isn't just about mindset. It blends everything we've talked about in this series so far, Dario. It's about power and influence. It's about communication, and also about things that we're going to talk about in future episodes, like strategic planning. So it's worthy work. Any leader who takes it on, that's something you could be super proud of. When you walk away from that role and move on to something else, if you're able to execute this effectively, it's a very rewarding experience.
Well, thank you, Susan. And to our listeners, if you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to join us next time for Coaching for Strategic Planning, where we'll explore how coaches help leaders turn vision into executable strategy. Until next time.